I had kind of a mixed career with shift work. I started working shifts when I joined the Marine Corps at 17 in 1964. I worked shifts for a lot of different kinds of shifts, especially in Vietnam, where we'd work 20 hours a day, every day, humping and digging in and filling sandbags, and then 2 hours on, 2 hours off, 1 hour on, 1 hour off, until the sun came up and we started and did it again. When I got back from Vietnam, I went to college, worked a lot of crummy night jobs while I was going to school. I joined the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department in 1964, and I stayed there for 9 years. I worked 2 years in a jail, and I worked 4 years on patrol. That was in South Central LA and in East LA later as a sergeant. And I also worked at the academy for a couple of years and a year as an admin. In all, that was about 9 years with the LA Sheriff's Department. During that time, I mostly worked, a 40-hour work week plus 20 hours of overtime on average every week. And I worked all different shifts, but I liked the night shift the best, especially the split mid-shift where you got lots of action. In 1978, I left the Sheriff's Department, took a job as a police chief overseas, and I worked there for 6 years. I still didn't get very good sleep. I traveled a whole lot. I covered a vast area of the North Central Pacific. And also I was on call 24/7, so my sleep was always interrupted. Went back to Washington, D.C. in 1984. Worked as a federal agent, as a criminal investigator for a couple of years, until my heart quit on the job. And that was the end of that career, and the end of shift work for the most part. Well, I enjoyed the night shift, frankly, because there was more action. You were dealing, mostly the people you dealt with after midnight were up to no good. You got some of the hottest action in those times, and I worked the streets at a time when cops were getting murdered about 4 times the rate they are now. So it was busy in those days. It was really busy. The other thing, the commute was easier. It was a lot more fun and a lot more action. I was never getting enough sleep. All the time I was working those long hours, especially on patrol, but I was going to grad school almost full time for the whole period. I'd finished a bachelor's degree while I was working at the jail on shifts with a fair amount of overtime. And then when I got on patrol, once I got off training, I started grad school. And so I was working 80 hours of overtime a month and going to grad school full time. So there wasn't much time for sleep. I was tired a lot, and it really affected my life in lots of ways, although, I was an old Marine and a cop, and so you just suck it up and do your job, but it affected everything. When I think back on how fatigue affected my performance in the field, I think there are 2 main issues for me. One was just the decisions I made, just the day-to-day decisions you make about what to do or not to do. I made a lot of poor life decisions in those years. Cost me a marriage, screwed up my kid, a lot of bad decisions that were made. And when I look back on them, a lot of them, I just wasn't getting enough sleep. I was young, So that explains some of the being dumb bit. But I also was tired. I was really tired all the time. So that was a piece of it. The other issue is one that I guess I can talk about because it's been a long time since I was a cop. I had more trouble controlling my temper when I was really tired. I mean, it's not a novel thing. If you've had kids, they get cranky when they're tired, right? If you've had kids, you've lost your temper with them more when you're tired from them being problems. It's something everybody knows, but we don't think about. And I knew that that was the case with me. And well, let me give you an example. One thing in particular, I remember. I'd been awake for about 36 hours. I'd worked an early night shift, so gone on about 10 in the evening. Didn't get off shift at the usual time when I was supposed to. Got off shift about 2 or 3 hours late because I had late reports. We'd made some arrests and things. After that, I had to go to court, so I drove to court, changed, drove to court, spent the day sitting in court, nodding off a little bit in the court deputy's office while we waited to be called, where you usually weren't called anyway. After that, I had class that night, so after that I went to the college and studied for a couple of hours, had more coffee. Came back then I went to class. After class, then I went back and went on shift. So it's kind of the usual routine for 3 days out of the week, all the time I was in school. After that, as I was suiting up in the locker room to start a shift, I remember telling myself, "You're tired. You've got to be extra cool tonight." And I said, "All right, I'll just deal with it. I'll be cool." Went on shift, and it worked pretty well at first. And the first guy out in my face, I was cool. The second guy, the third guy, I was cool. The fourth and the fifth, and the third guy again, still Mr. Cool. But somewhere about number 7, this guy came running up at me, yelling and screaming, and, pow! And it wasn't that I could make up an excuse for knocking this guy on his ass. It was that I wasn't going to do that. I had made up my mind I wasn't going to do that. And the main thing a cop's got to be, one of the main things, is in control. And I wasn't in control. And so really, when I look back almost 40 years ago, that was kind of when I started thinking about this problem. Why wasn't I under control? I knew it affected other people, not just me that way. You see it every day. And so that was kind of the beginning of me thinking about, geez, I got to find a way to manage fatigue. I've got to find a way to get some sleep. I hadn't even been thinking about it. I was a grunt. You just do what you got to do every single day. And that wasn't good enough. I think all those years of working shifts and having my sleep disrupted on the job, I think over the long term, they just threw my whole body out of sync. Nothing ever worked right. I mean, you know that feeling where you get off shift and you take a shower and you brush your teeth and you step out of the shower. 5 minutes later, you feel like a herd of camels walk through your mouth. That was kind of my life for most of 20 years. So that's what I think it did to my body. And the time it came home, frankly, was in 1985. I was a criminal investigator for the feds. I'd been bounced halfway around the world to investigate an assassination in one of our territories. And my partner and I we'd been at it almost all day long for about 20 days, some of it pretty hairy stuff, just always at it. I'd been really sick at one point, had a fever and things. And all of a sudden, my heart quit. I was a runner. I was in decent shape for all the challenges of working shifts. I mean, I exercised and I ran and things, but my heart just quit in the middle of no damn where. That was a surprise. That was the end of my career in law enforcement. Big change. Yeah, I do have sleep disorders. I've got sleep apnea. It was diagnosed about 10 years ago, and I've taken treatment for it since then. Actually, my wife will tell you that my sleep apnea goes back 20 years or more of snoring and her getting lousy sleep. And that's finally when I went to the sleep doc, I was about ready to be brained with something. And she was right. And it really has helped a great deal. I've gotten 2 kinds of treatment and they've both worked well. To fatigue-related issues affect cops' family members. I mean, well, I'll be blunt. There you are, you come home, you can't get any sleep, you're not able to go to the kids' school events, you pull your own weight around the house lots of times, you're not there for people because when they're up and active and the rest of the world's going on, you're either not there or you're trying to get some sleep. You're trying to fall asleep sometimes at 8 or 9 o'clock at night to get a little edge before you go to night shift. Can't do that because the rest of the world says, hey, the party's just starting. And you can't get good sleep during the day when you are trying to sleep. The world keeps trying to wake you up for one reason or another. And so you get touchy about sleep. And so, you know, you're Mr. Cranky. You've got a shorter fuse. Life sucks for you and your family a lot because you don't get enough sleep. And so it's a major problem for everybody who works shifts. You got to figure out how to manage that. And I didn't figure that out until way after I was done with shift work, unfortunately. But my third marriage has worked out very well, thank you. Yeah. Well, the quality and quantity of my sleep. When I was working shifts, I was sleeping where I could, when I could. I'd get a nap in the boiler room at the station if I got a chance before shift or before I had to go to court after shift. I'd get home and I'd have a few drinks to help me go to sleep at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd wake up after 3 or 4 hours and couldn't get back to sleep. I'd try and sleep in the evening, but everybody else is active. It just was a mess. Sometimes on a foggy night or something, I had nothing going on, I'd pull the car over my partner and I'd take turns catching a couple winks, but I was always tired. It was just default state was tired. Always. always. It just never went away. Even a days off, you can't sleep normally. You crash like a dead man, but then you still have things to do, and that's the time you're trying to make up for all the things you missed during the week or that you didn't do. Now though, life's a lot better. I sleep almost 8 hours every single night. I monitor it with my Fitbit. I stay in track of it. If I have to lose a little on sleep, I make some extra time. I go to bed a little early. For ages, I couldn't fall asleep even after I quit shift work. A friend of mine who's a police health and safety researcher, John Vila, and an ex-cop. When he and I first met, John, we were just kind of talking, getting to know one another a bit, and he said, because I studied sleep then. And he said, well, how long did it take you to start getting sleep properly after you quit the job? And I said, about 10 years. John says, yep, me too. John was a 26-year veteran of New York State Police. Now though, like I said, I get good sleep, but it's also because I'm paying paying dues for other times that are sleep related, probably in part. I've got early stage Alzheimer's. I'm 70 now, so I feel pretty good. I'm pretty active in things, but I can't do my job as a researcher or a professor anymore because I've got early stage Alzheimer's. The good part is the Alzheimer's meds really help me get to sleep, so I fall asleep pretty easily and I get good night's sleep. It's amazing how good I feel when I've had a good night's sleep. And when I only get 6 hours of sleep, which used to be my oh please amount, I feel like somebody's robbing me. When I get 8 hours of sleep, I feel so much better. It's really a big difference. So that's the upside of Alzheimer's, I guess. I felt really sleepy on the job lots of times, although where I worked, the adrenaline kept you going a lot. You'd leave the station 5 or 6 calls behind, you'd handle 20 calls plus a night, you'd make 15 or 20 car stops. We were moving. So the adrenaline would keep you going. But I remember lots of times where there'd be a lull in service and that adrenaline would dip. And man, all of a sudden I'm up over the curb facing some telephone pole that I magically didn't quite hit or run off the road, drowsy driving. I mean, every cop I know's fallen asleep at a stoplight someplace and people are honking and you're embarrassed and you feel like an idiot. That's what it was like as far as how it affected my job. Affected how safe I was, how well I was taking care of my partner if I was a driver. The kind of menace on the road. Another thing on that, I remember getting off way late. I'd been up for more than a day. I'd been trying to get some Z's in the boiler room because I knew I couldn't drive home safely. And they come down and wake me up and say that I'm wanted in Superior Court in downtown LA. I was working in South Central LA in Firestone, the oldest, toughest station at the time. And so I get in my car, put on a suit, and get in the car and head up one of the old narrow freeways in the middle of Los Angeles, right through the traffic at about 9:30 at morning, because the court had called and whoever was in charge was supposed to respond to that case couldn't come. And so I'm driving up the Harbor Freeway at just before 10 o'clock in the morning, and wall-to-wall traffic everywhere, and I'm trying to stay awake. And I'm hanging onto the wheel, I've got the window down, I've got the music up. Every time I start to nod, I'm shaking my head like this, and then I'd be focused for about 10 more seconds, and then it'd go. And I glance in my rearview mirror. All the cars behind me have taken a dive for the curb. I was wandering across 3 lanes of traffic in that kind of traffic at that time of the morning, like a drunk driver. Well, that scared me enough that I made it to court. But holy crap, I mean, that was amazing. Yeah. Here's what I know about police fatigue. I've talked to literally thousands and thousands and thousands of police officers over the last 40 years that I've been working on this problem and thinking about it. The one thing, every audience, every group I talk to, it's always the same. Everybody's nodding, everybody's got their fall asleep stories, everybody's ashamed of times when they acted bad because they were too cranky or mean to family, or families shattered, lives gone to crap. Most of them, or a large proportion of them, are obese, which is one of the things that happens when you're tired. It's a major health and safety risk. When I started out on this research in the early 70s, in the later 70s rather, my idea was that maybe fatigue and not being able to get enough sleep had an effect on 3 different things that it turns out 40 years later probably are all connected to each other. One of the things was officer safety. You're not as aware of what's going on. It's harder to make a good decision, harder to handle your temper. The temper you need when you've got to fight for your life, right? I also think it's pretty clear now, we've got the research that says this affects your health. Short term, it affects how resilient you are tonight. How well do you bounce back from comforting a child, or dealing with a family disturbance, or dealing with some drunk, or handling a robbery in progress call, to dealing with somebody's dead grandmother. You know, you've got to make all these changes, and it affects that. It affects how you deal with people. Are you as polite? Are you as good at managing people? Because that's what a good cop does. I don't know, tired cops get cranky just like everybody else, only we don't get to get cranky. And we're supposed to be managing how we're behaving and how we're managing other people. Over the long term, well, the other issue I was concerned about was police stress. I thought, gee, maybe there's a connection between both I wasn't thinking about the physiology at the time. I was just thinking about, you do this thing, it's not the best thing you could have done. If you cop out, you're in major trouble. You lose a job even over some thing that can happen in a split second. How do you handle all this stuff? So that's more stress, but it's also stressful. The family, you don't ever get any time to relax fully because you're always carrying a gun and you're always on duty, and the way we do policing in the US, most places. And I also thought that maybe there was a connection to officer suicides. We didn't have statistics on it then, but everybody knew other cops who'd killed themselves. It was just something people did when they had it for one reason or another. And I thought, you know, if it makes you more impulsive, and this was just my take on it at the time, and it's still kind of just my take on this aspect of it. But if it makes you more impulsive, well, maybe the fact that you're an impulsive person with a firearm at your side 24/7, maybe that's part of why so many cops eat their guns. So I thought about all that set of things together. Look, after studying this problem for 40 years, 40 years since I screwed something up on the streets as a cop, that made me think about how lack of sleep, being too tired, was affecting my ability to be a good cop. So after 40 years, here's what I know. If you don't get enough sleep, if you work too many irregular hours, that undermines your safety, your health, and your performance, how well you can do that job, how well you can take care of the community that you work for, and the partners who depend on you for backup. Day to day, every single day you're on the job too tired, it reduces your resilience, your ability to bounce back and do this job, that job, change from Mr. Nice Guy to Mr. You really don't want to screw with me, do you? You know, to do the things you need to do to be a good cop. But over the course of being Mr. Tired Cop, day after week after month after year in a career, over the course of your career, if you're a young cop, you watch for this. If you're an old cop, look back and see how people around you have changed. You'll see this degradation of family life, how many divorces get stacked up, of overall health, of wellness. How many of them become just these cynical, everything sucks, everybody's an Adam Henry. You know, life is rotten. All of that you can attribute to, in part, to fatigue and sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, those things you're vulnerable to. That's not the answer to the whole problem. It's not the magic bullet that will keep you protected by some guardian angel. It's the thing without which you can't be healthy, you can't be safe, you can't live a good life. If you don't do that, the other things are at risk. Everything else you value, everything you're striving for. You'll make more mistakes. You'll screw up more often. And life isn't going to be as good. That's it.